I believe that the cycle that we're in, which is in September of 2025, is a time of great transformation. I have often told people that there are 3 Earths, and there's a crash and burn Earth, then there's the do-over Earth, and then there's the ascending Earth. I'm not going to bother describing the crash and burn Earth. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. But the do-over Earth is well-meaning people who refuse to accept that humans on Earth are not the only conscious species. And they refuse to accept that they are powerful beyond measure. And they're stuck in their rigidness or in their dogma, as you mentioned.
Welcome to a Broaderlands podcast. The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast. Maureen, welcome to Broaderlands podcast. What an honor to have you on.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure. And it's so fun to discover that we're neighbors.
Yeah. Yeah, I got your book, Waking Up in 5D, and I know you got a number of books. I remember I was in Chandler. Yeah, I got that. It's right there, if you could see it. The background. You know, and I remember being in Chandler at the mall, and I'm like, I need to contact her.
That's awesome.
And you're here.
Here we are. And, neither one of us knew that I have been to your hometown where you live now so many times.
Yeah.
Because I have family there.
That's
very
awesome. Cool. I love the whole title, and I know you got a number of books, but Waking Up in 5D, I had my own awakening, and I don't think it's a one-time deal, as you know, and there's many awakenings and many realizations and remembrance and all that good stuff, but I would love for you to break down 3D, 4D, and 5D. What's the difference, and why does 4D often get, cut out, it seems like sometimes?
Absolutely. I'd be thrilled to do that. Well, number one, I want to say that all of us are living in 1, 2, and 3, and we don't realize it. When we do something linear, we are in 2D, and when we become self-aware of who we are, then that's 1D. And so all these are kind of nested together. It's like a baby doesn't know he's not his mom. He thinks the mom and he are one, especially when they're breastfeeding, until they reach a certain point of separation. And then the baby starts to realize that he is autonomous. So that's, the beginning of 1D. So 3D is what we most commonly refer to as the physical world. And it's where we encounter most of our activity, our experiences, and everything that we think, touch and feel. 4D is a slightly faster vibrational data set, and it's where the emotions are elevated, and it is where we are still in polarity. So whenever you get anxious because of traffic, or maybe your partner says something to you and you think, that's not fair, that's not what we agreed to, stuff like that get you, riled inside because you think this is happening this way, but this is what I'm being told. I guess the word is gaslighting, isn't it? Anyway, so that's 4D, that reaction to gaslighting, not the actual act, but the reaction. And then 5D is another data set, a little higher. And in 5D, we are in a zone where we're plugged into our divine self in such a way that we're able to know and understand the reality around us in a way that recognizes the existence of others. We haven't really tuned into being empathetic to others. That comes in time, but it's more like someone comes to your house that you don't know very well, and maybe they come with a friend, and the friend you know, but the new guest you don't know, and you look at the guest and you say, would you like some licorice tea? And they look at you kind of funny and they say, "That's my favorite. How did you know?" So there's those kinds of things that happen in 5D. In 5D, when you are angry or upset, you tend to open your mouth and something loving comes out, which is really hilarious. So, for example, one of the ways to stay in 5D is to say, I am choosing to be 100% aligned with my most evolved self. Now, I'll share that recently I was in a conversation with my spouse, and he said something that I didn't like hearing. I didn't think it was true. But then I thought, well, maybe I'm just reacting. So then I said that little prayer I just shared, I'm choosing to be my most evolved fifth dimensional self. And out of my mouth came the words, I think you're right. So 3D is where we have experiences and lots of polarity. 4D is this place of high emotion, and 4D pushes us into 5D, or it brings us back down to 3D. And the way to understand that is if you're a musician, you might have an awareness of a major scale. So 1, 3, 5. And then when you go to the fourth, there's a certain tension, and that tension wants to bring you back to third or up to fifth, and then maybe from fifth to the octave. And that's all very clear in this awareness of the dimensions. So if you're a singer, and I'm a wannabe singer, but I'll sing it for you because I think it's very helpful for people who don't know music, but if they hear it, they'll begin to understand. So it's 1, 3, 5, 3, 1, 1, 3, 4, 4 wants to shift somewhere, 3, 4, 4, 4, 5, 5, 1. You can hear it, and it makes sense. So that's what's happening. So that's why people skip over 4, because they don't really need to stay there. It's actually faster than 3D. And it if you land there, it either pushes you up or down. And the exception to that is when you get stuck. And when you get stuck, it's when you're in lower fourth and you can't seem to lift yourself out. So that's the place, like in Dreams May Come, when the protagonist went to purgatory to get his wife, and it was her making, it wasn't real. It was like that.
Wow. So it's like a portal or like a bridge, the fourth dimension.
I think bridge is a good word, but it's also a portal, like you say. But the portal is moving so fast that you have to is not the right word. You want to be aware that it's going to push you up or down. Yeah.
Okay.
And we don't know when we're in 5D until something happens. And the classic example is, you take your favorite pen and you put it down, and then you go do something and you come back and your pen's not there on the desk where you left it. And you think to yourself, but I just put it there. And then you just grab another pen and you do your thing. And then later you come back and you're in a good space again and your pen's right there. And you think to yourself, okay, who's messing with me? And the answer is you are messing with you, because when you are in a blissful state or a joyful state, you're in 5D. Everyone is. And everyone's sliding back and forth all the time. And then when you put something down and you're in 5D, when you come back in 3D and you're stressed, I got to find my pen, I need to write something, that energy puts you back into third. That's stress energy. And you can't see it because you put it down in fifth. And the first time this happened to me, I used to ask, where'd my stuff go? And I was always told it's in a higher dimension. And then one day, because I was teaching people to ask only one question, and the one question is, what? What's going on? What's going on? It's the only, of the 6 interview questions, it's the only one that is open-ended. If I say, where did you go? Why did you do this? When did you do this? These are all so I can hear your answer and solve whatever it is I need to solve. But what is wide open. So when I asked the what question after something disappeared, and I wasn't even thinking about it, it was just kind of a reaction because I'd been teaching it. Lo and behold, my guide said, Maureen, you were in a higher dimension when you put it down.
Wow.
That's when I began to understand. It's like with the Russian nesting dolls. If you're in 5, if you're in the outside doll, you can see down. But if you're inside doll, you can't see out.
Wow. Yeah. So, like, when you can observe the world and just see, like, all the unnecessary suffering, where people are trapped in the labels and the flags and all this stuff, even the spacesuit, would that be being in 5D, looking at 3D with compassion and understanding?
Yeah. In 3D, we seek understanding. In 5D, we don't care. Everything's funny.
Mm,
And that's a very curious thing for me to say. But where I'm going with that is there are energies in this reality that would like us to keep fighting. And there are lots of reasons why. Um, some of it has to do with outsiders or interlopers or fallen angels, whatever you want to call it. And their agenda is to keep us fighting. And that will keep us moving our technology forward. But that also means that we're abandoning our spirituality. So we need to level up our spirituality with our technology. So what I see is anytime we want to make a comparison, we're pulling ourselves down into 3D. So trying to understand why somebody behaves the way they do pulls us into 3D. And that's what those that would have us fail want. And when we look at what's going on, and like you say, with compassion, and we think, that makes no sense. That's so sad. It's so uh, difficult for me to comprehend what's really happening here. That's when you say, okay, I don't understand, but I'm going to show compassion. I'm going to feel compassion, and I'm not going to judge. And that's a new place that most of us haven't spent a lot of time. Mhm.
um, heard you in an interview say that you don't really watch the news, but when you do, like, sometimes you'll hear something and you'll say, "That's not true." And like, I have that too. Like, I like, there's like this inner knowing, like I call it a bullshit, bullshit, filter, excuse my language, but you know when something's not right, it's like, it's not even with the mind, it's like right here, like there's this inner
Mhm.
knowing. What do you call that?
It's one of the clairs, and I don't remember what clair it is, but there's clairaudience, clairsentience, clairvoyance, and then there's one other clair that represents what you just described, and that's true of a lot of people who are in this work. So I recommend you continue to develop that because that's a big gift. That's one of the important gifts. You don't have to have the ability to see or hear voices or anything else. If you have this inner knowing, boom, you got it. You're already on it. Um, and what you want to do is keep a journal. And this goes to everybody
Mm,
who's listening. When you get a sudden insight and you think, like Boo Boo has just described, that's not true. I know that's not true in my gut, even though you don't have any physical proof. Then write it down because initially that's what happened to me. I was getting all this information and I was way ahead of the curve. Um, I started saying that there were 3 Earths in 2020 in 1995. And, I bet you it was another 10 years before anybody else said that. And the same with 5D. My book on 5D was the first one out there. And I spent like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years writing it and then 2 years holding hands with the editor till it got out, you know? So it wasn't like it was an inner knowing. And that's
right.
what I'm saying to you, that idea of inner knowing is one of the clairs. And look it up. You'll have the name next time we talk.
I can't memorize the Clairs. I just say the Claire Bears just so I
Oh, I like it.
cover it all.
I like
But I know, like, when and I don't really like, I think it's really for me, I've learned how to live the 12 steps. And with the 12 steps is basically the same principles in every spiritual tradition or religion. I actually
Mhm.
applying the principles, like, taking responsibility, pausing, meditating, praying, just being mindful, all that stuff. I think that helped me enhance. that within myself.
Yeah, and that's really that's where I think we are going. Uh, for example, um, the problem we have with organized religion, for example, is it's like my way or the highway kind of a
Mm,
thing. Whereas in the 12-step program, they don't really care. They just say, this is a practice, this is a tool. It's found in all the practices all over the world. Use it and make yourself be uh, powerful.
mm.
So
You know what I
I,
appreciate? Oh, I'm
I,
sorry. Go
I
ahead.
think that all of us are going to be aligned with that idea of the 12-step program. Is what I'm really trying to say.
Well, you know what I appreciate about your book is you talk about how language impacts us, 3D, 4D, 5D language, and I'd sit in
No,
12 step meetings and I would hear people say they would, there's a custom that I'm an alcoholic, I'm an alcoholic, and as the years go by, I realized how much that was unhealthy for me, and I could see this like lower frequency. It's kind of like the map of consciousness by David Hawkins. Like if I keep claiming this stuff, it's going to keep me in a lower frequency. So I had to break that cycle. I had to break that pattern. Like I just say, I'm grateful to be here, or I'm a grateful member of blah, blah, blah. Right. But to say I'm an alcoholic
Oh
over and
yeah.
over was very
Right.
unhealthy. And it kind of seemed like an invisible prison that it really it
Yes.
prevents.
No, that's a really good point. Um, the idea of saying I am an alcoholic is because so many people who have had that affliction have been in denial that they aren't. And then they tell themselves, well, I can have one drink. And there's no such thing,
Mm,
you know? I think this business of I am an alcoholic was to break free from the self-denial. And once you hit that level, then you don't need it anymore because you're not in denial. You recognize, okay, I'm human, I screw up, I don't always say the right thing, sometimes I'm late, whatever it is. And along with that is I don't drink anymore. I don't drink anymore. You can't even say I can't drink because that's not 100% true. It's more like I don't do it. Doesn't appeal to me anymore. It changes the vibe, like you say.
mm. Yeah, I think it's a trap after a period of time because it's meant to be
Right.
helpful, but that's not my identity. That's not who I really am. That's part of the false lower
I think you
self.
grow and you
Yeah.
grow out of it, grow out of the need to say that. That's very cool. I like it. And that's good advice for lots of people who are in any kind of recovery program. You know, um, if they had one for television watching, I'd have to join. I don't watch TV. I don't have a TV. And for years, it never dawned on me that when I would sit down to watch a particular TV show, then I would sit there all evening. I couldn't seem to break away.
How would you define the ego?
I see the ego as a device that we have added to our consciousness to help us survive and to find our way in the world. And then once we achieve that, and that usually happens by up to age 33, then we spend the rest of our life undoing the control that the ego has created. So I like to tell people your ego is your friend. Don't fight it. Just honor that you have an ego. And I often refer to my ego by saying, my personality wants X, but my guidance wants Y, and I get to choose.
Mm.
And so then we honor the ego. Yeah, I validated the ego, but I'm not doing it.
I always say the ego's not your amigo when you're unconscious of it, but once you become conscious of it, you kind of
Oh, that's
integrate it.
beautiful. Oh, I like it. Can I use that?
Sure. Yeah, I was so unaware of my thoughts and like I was so identified with them, my belief systems. And I think once I had an awakening and I started to really practice these principles, I started to have separation, like a spaciousness, and I wasn't easily reactive. And sometimes I am, but that I think this lifetime practice, but I'm sure I have some kind of imprints and other, just be aware of it. But yeah, before I was so identified. You tell me F the Raiders and I'll be pissed off because it was so identified with this mask.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Um, I've come to understand that sports, and especially sports fan, use the sport to express emotions that they don't want to or they're not socially acceptable to. And it gives them a reason to behave a certain way. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. When I lived in Wisconsin, oh my goodness, you couldn't live in Wisconsin and not be a Packers fan, for example. So I understand.
Wow. You said earlier there were energies that want to keep us in 3D or other beings or who are these energies?
Well, that's a really good question. And I have a pretty good idea who they are. But I have always chosen to not name them because when we name them, we give them power.
Mm.
So I refer to them globally as those that would have us fail. And anybody who fits into that category, that's what they get called. And I do that deliberately because when you use someone's name, you're actually giving them power and you're moving into that polarity thing. Because when I say those who would have us fail, I'm not naming actions and I'm not naming people and I'm not naming some horrible thing that went down. I'm simply saying, you know what? There's an energy, there's a group, there's beings that fit that category. And I'm recognizing it and I'm choosing to unhook from that. And the other reason why it's important to understand this is there's a lot of people who think that humanity needs to level up and humanity needs to stop fighting and humanity needs to stop murdering each other. But they forget or they don't know or they pretend they don't know that there's and like who was it? Flip Wilson used to say, I have the devil on my shoulder and I have the angel on the other side. And people don't realize that there actually is a thrust to push them in a certain way. That's why addictions are so um, um, troublesome because they continue to push us in a certain way. And so when we recognize that there is energy that is working counter to our spiritual progress, it's a little bit like discovering that the rock you've been pushing is made out of lead and there's no way you're going to push it up that hill.
Mm.
And it's not that it's no way, but it means you need to find a different way to get up the hill and maybe pushing that rock isn't the way to go. So it invites each of us that when we hit a wall or we hit a place of difficulty, and you know this from being in the 12-step program, if you get close to being tempted, you call your lifeline. You call someone who will talk you off the ledge. And isn't that awesome? So I think it's important to understand that I believe humans are good. I believe humans are good people. And there are energies that are evil, but I believe that that energy comes from this other influence. And at the same time, when I think about creation, I think that all of us came from source and that we chose to separate from that which is inseparable to expand consciousness, to expand the database. And when we get our arms around that, then it's like, oh, wow, I'm way more powerful than I thought I was. Mhm.
And you got into the Akashic Records eventually. Was that early on in your journey? Um, how did you?
Uh, no, I think it was, well, I was doing the Merkaba and the Flower of Life work for probably 10 years when I got into the Akashic Records. And I was told by my guides right away that I needed to start a training program and take people through a very high level, high what's the word I want? High consciousness version. And I have had people come back to me who have taken training from other people and then take mine, and they all say the same thing, that the training that you provide is many times more elevated. And that's why I
Wow.
wrote the book on the um, Akashic Records, so that people could have that information and level up. You
Hey.
know, um, again, I was kicking and screaming on that one. I did not want to write that book. And my guides were insistent. They were so insistent that my Chinese organizers actually published the book before my American publisher did.
Wow.
Hmm.
What is that? I mean, you say guides, like, but for me, like, I've been encouraged to write this book and I'm writing this book, but I've been like, I could hear it in here, like, it's telling me to write this book. And, I just, like, what is that? Like, I don't know if it's my guides or my higher self but I just get this strong feelings to do this.
There is a way to have a direct connection to your higher self. And I've taught it in many, many interviews. And it's pretty straightforward and pretty simple. You go into meditation and you ask your higher self, okay, I don't know, you don't know who you're talking to, but you say higher self, calling your higher self by name brings it in. And then you ask for symbols or signals for yes, no, and neutral. And neutral is not maybe. So many times I hear people say maybe instead of neutral. I go, no, no, no. Neutral means either answer is equal and fair. It doesn't mean maybe. And you spend 45 days asking about unimportant, insignificant questions like what clothes to wear, what route to take, what food to buy, anything that you're willing to navigate, yes or no. And, sometimes it's important and you don't realize it. So if you struggle, then you simply say, um, okay, I'm not getting a clear answer. I'm just going to go ahead and make this decision. And you let go. You unhook from trying to make your higher self perform. And then you keep doing this and you do it for 45 days. And one of the things I ask people to do is if you start this practice, you name the day that you're done, because nobody remembers. When did I listen to that blog post? When did I listen to that broadcast? When did I hear Maureen at that talk? You don't remember these things, but you do remember moving forward. Like everybody knows when Christmas is, it's coming up. We all know when Thanksgiving is, it's coming up. So it's easier to remember. And I often tie it to a holiday like Halloween or Thanksgiving or whatever to help us remember. And so, if your 45 days lands a day before or a day after some big day, take the day that's the holiday and make that your completion date. And then the last thing is you set aside your pendulum and other forms, muscle testing, all other forms of divination, so that you can practice this in a playful way. You don't learn French and German at the same time. And it's pretty straightforward. So it's 45 days of asking unimportant, insignificant questions. And you always ask the same way. Higher self, is it in my highest and best good to take this action step? And the reason you do that is because you're developing a familiarity. And, if you have a pal and whenever they call, they say, hey, boo boo, what's going on? You know who it is. Even if
Yeah,
you haven't looked at your phone to see who it is, you know who it is because they always call you the same way.
I love
It's
that.
pretty cool.
I love in your book, in Waking Up in 5D, you have a section where you talk about, there's a paragraph where it says, it talks about behaving as if everyone's watching you. And I remember early on, I put a circle and a triangle, which is like the sign of the 12 step. And they were like, oh, you shouldn't put that because if you react, a certain way, they're going to judge you with that, whatever. But for me, it was like, there was a challenge for me to behave better, so I put that on and it helped me behave better. Like if people are watching,
Now
so I
tell me
really,
about the
what's that?
circle and the triangle.
The circle and triangle is the symbol of Alcoholics Anonymous. It stands for unity, service, and recovery. But I also
I
know there's
didn't.
a deeper meanings to that as well. The circle and the
Oh, and
triangle.
that's fabulous because it's also a way to manifest.
Wow.
Yeah. And if
Yeah.
you imagine that the circle is blue and the triangle is brown, you put everything in the circle, that everything in the blue circle that you want to create or manifest, and then you cover it with brown.
Wow.
So well done. That's very cool. So go back to the story. I kind of interrupted you.
Oh no, it's just a challenge for me to behave better, and not saying I'm still gonna make mistakes. I still, I'm still having this human experience, but it actually really challenged me to really take responsibility for my daily behaviors. Do I owe someone amends? Was I being a jerk? Um, et cetera, et cetera. So just really just taking responsibility. And there's a prayer I use at night that my good friend Patty O would say, "May others treat me tomorrow as I treated others today." And it really challenges me to be a better person.
I really like it. I really like it. And it's true. We all think we're going to get away with stuff, but we don't. And in the end, we're the judge anyway. So what difference does it make?
Yeah.
We're constantly judging ourselves. And what I know from spirit is spirit no longer judges us.
Mm,
We're no longer in a framework or a cycle of judgment. That means there's no more karma. And what that really means is you and I are not held back by the BS that we pulled when we were younger. You know, it doesn't matter.
mhm.
Doesn't matter, you know? And there may be some people who never did anything they shouldn't, but they're few and far between, you know? And some of the best teachers are those of us who have done stupid stuff or mean or inappropriate stuff because we can see the outcome and be filled with regret. And that gives us incentive to be different tomorrow. And, there's even a way to change the past. So we don't have to live with regret anymore. It's pretty
Mm.
cool.
There's so much stuff to ask you. I'm like, what do I ask her? But what's popping up right now, I want to talk about the dolphins and the whales, remote viewing, the Merkaba, but I also wanted to ask you something about entity attachments. I've talked to some people and, they've said, when they work with addicts, there's not one addict that they never worked with.
That
But
doesn't?
yeah, that doesn't have entity attachments.
Oh,
People
yeah,
that are
that
really,
they entity's attention, yeah.
yeah.
Well, and the reason for that, and again, this is one of those things like you described, you just have knowing. So years and years ago, when people asked me about drinking, I was shown that a person's aura gets holes in it. Now, if someone is maybe they have a glass of wine every night and they're not really a drinker, if they can't not do that, they're still, into that realm of being addicted because they have to have it. And addictions can come to us in any number of ways. But in the case of alcohol, if you have a beer and you're not a drinker, you maybe have a beer because you went to a football game or whatever, your body will repair that field, your aura, within 24 to 48 hours. So it's not a big deal. But when I teach the Akashic Records, I tell people you may not open the Akashic Records if you have had a drink in the last 24 hours. And the reason has to do with if your aura is full of holes, you have an open invitation to energies that can come in. hmm
Wow,
So that's
that's
why.
interesting.
hmm
What about
So
if
if you're
someone
drinking,
Oh,
yeah,
go
if you're
ahead.
drinking all the time, you never get a chance to repair it. Mhm.
Wow. So what if someone has a lot of trauma? I mean, a lot of times, like Gabor Mate would say, and a lot of other doctors that the root of addiction, there's trauma. There's some form of pain, which means could that be also open up holes within your aura?
Uh, it creates a connection to entities or energies that help you express your pain. Because people, when you have a trauma, you often bury it so you can survive, or you cut off a piece of yourself so you can survive. And that hole in you, or that, that blank memory, so to speak, causes you to create an attachment, often with energies that do want to emote. Think of the old movie called Ghost, where um, there was a need to express the love that Patrick Swayze had for Demi Moore. And he couldn't do that from his place in the astral. He had to move through Whoopi Goldberg to create that emotion. So when people die, very often they die with an agenda. I had a client who had a big anger issue, and she never used to be like this. So we were trying to figure out what was going on. And I was shown right away that her best friend, who had two daughters, and one had already died, and the second one had died recently, that the energy of that daughter was angry at God because she was dying, young at age 36, and there was nothing she could do about it. And so when this lady died, she moved into my client. And so anytime there was any kind of a drama, things weren't right, she would go ballistic. She wouldn't do a little reaction. She'd give the $100 response to the 10-cent problem. And my guides came in and told me, just clear her. And we cleared her, and that whole problem went away. So I want to be clear that a lot of times we think of entities as negative or dark, bad stuff. And what I want people to understand is it may simply be someone who has passed, who has unexpressed energy, emotion, and they find someone who can't use a match for that, and they jump in and move that energy through that person. So that sometimes happens as the trauma. And for example, if a person were molested or violated in some way as a child, they may have hooked up with an energy that would fight for them. And that might not be who they really are.
Mm, that's interesting. Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, it's cohabitation. And the idea is no one gets to live in your house, your body, except you.
Carl Jung in Latin said spiritus contra spiritum, which means spirits against spirit. And he says alcohol in Latin means spirits. It's the same meaning for the highest religious or spiritual experience with the most depraving liquid or alcohol, right? Spirits.
Interesting.
So I'm wondering if, like, when I'm drinking, am I inviting spirits in? Because it gave me relief early on when I was in that lower frequency. It gave me
Right,
it's like
right.
being in Arizona. We're in Arizona, and if you're at home watching TV and you have the AC on and you take a drink of water, you just put your water down, you continue to watch your TV, homeostasis. But if I'm out in 115-degree weather hiking and I take a drink of water, it's going to have a different effect on me. And I think that's where the addiction kicks in, when you have all that trauma and that unresolved emotional pain and psychological pain. It gives me a different effect. But also it becomes maybe it's shooting up a flare or inviting some other types of entities in. I don't know. Along with the trauma, it's the perfect storm. I have no idea.
Yeah, and for sure, it provides comfort, so
Yeah,
it's hard to resist.
yeah,
Yeah, understood.
yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
It's like a lot of people have what I would call food addiction, or they're stress eaters, and the minute they have stress, they're going for the chocolate or they're going for the ice cream, because that little bit of comfort satiates, and there's a biological reason for that. You probably know about it as well, so it's very similar.
And that's giving us dopamine, right? Like,
That's
and
right.
so we're all dope dope addicts in some way. Dope fiends, right?
Right. Another very clever use of words.
Yeah. Wow, it's interesting. Going back to the Akashic records, one of the things I love interviewing people when they have the life reviews, and does those clips, those visions, or that when they replays their life, is that coming from the Akashic records?
Yes. When we die, we go through a couple of things. We separate from the body, but we stay close. And that usually takes 3 days for the body to completely leave. And that's why you can have your life review and then come back in. And many times, more recently, people are being given the life review with full awareness that they're going to go back into a body and that they use that knowing to step up.
Hmm.
It's like what you said. If you're acting like somebody's watching, it changes how you interact with people. I think that's lovely. I'm gonna go find that quote.
And another thing is like one of the 12, what the 12 steps taught me to do was to, when I wake up, I think about my day ahead. And throughout the day, I can pause when agitated or angry. But and at nighttime, I have a review. I have a night review. And I look at what I could have done better, what I could have done, just looking at my actions. Do I owe someone an apology? And that's like a life review for me on a daily basis. It's living on a spiritual base. I think that's what spirituality really is. It's not really so much about having a near death experience, but having a daily life review.
I like it. I think it's a brilliant suggestion, and you're right. It's absolutely, some of us do this without thinking about it,
Yeah.
but it doesn't come naturally for everyone. And having it in the program is spectacular. What a great piece of advice.
Yeah, I think eventually it becomes second nature. It doesn't mean
Right.
I I don't act out. I do, but I have tools to use when I do, to fix stuff. And they say a clear conscience makes a soft pillow. And by doing this, I have a clearer conscience versus just robbing someone or being taking advantage of someone or lying to someone. It just makes a huge difference if that makes sense.
It does. It really does. It's there's so much sweetness in the full on practice of the 12-step program. You know, it
you know,
it actually is like a way to level up many levels all in one fell swoop.
mm. And don't get me wrong, there is dogma in the 12-step program. There is a lot of limiting beliefs and customs, but it's my responsibility. And I don't have to, okay, I know that's not healthy for me, then I can put a boundary on that. I could stop that. I think you talk about something like that. I forget what you put in the book about where things no longer match with you. I forget what section that
Yeah,
was.
that's
Trying to think.
exactly right. A couple of things. I encourage people to stop saying I have to, because I believe that that's a handoff of your power. And when you hand off your power, who knows where it will land or who knows who will take it. So when you say I have to, you're telling the universe, I don't have control over my life. Someone else does. Whereas when you say I get to have dinner with my beloved, or I'm going to go pick up my kids because they love it when I'm on time. Um, I promised my boss I'd get this report done. I need to leave now. Um, I like waking up well rested, so I need to leave the party now. All of these things put the ownership of the choice back on you, because there's truly very little that we quote have to do. Maybe we have to pay taxes. Maybe we uh, even commitments. You want to keep commitments. And even commitments you can change. You can go back to the original person and say, look, I promised I would show up every day, but I'm exhausted and I'm not going to be able to come today. And I know I promised I would be there every day, but it's not going to happen today. And I'm owning that I'm choosing not to come.
Hmm.
And I hope you're okay with that. There's no apology in there. It's simply me stepping into my power and saying, look, I'm examining what's going on with me and I can't keep my agreement. If we wait till after the missed appointment or the missed agreement, that is uh, that is a cause for um, broken trust, and it causes disagreement from in many levels. And it's so simple to say. I remember when I first moved to New York City, um, and I didn't have enough money to make the rent.
Mm.
And so I wrote my landlord an email and I said, I'm not going to be able to pay the rent on time. And he wrote back and said, when do you think you'll have it? And I said, well, I've got a class coming up and I think within the next 10 days I'll have it and be able to send it. And he wrote back and said, well, send it when you have it. New York
Mm.
City. Why? Because I wrote him, like on the 25th, and I could project that I wasn't going to have that money. So that's what I'm talking about. Step up when you know you can't fulfill an agreement. It's okay, but don't be the only person that knows.
Mm. I appreciate that. Early on in my awakening, I had a lot of mystics come to me, whether I was sleeping or just some other, because I didn't grow up with a religious family. There were gang members in my family and a lot of addiction that ran in my family. But so I was never brought up with any spirituality or religion. I think holidays once in a great while, we might go to a Catholic church, but after my awakening, I had like Yogananda just came to me strong. Just all these different Rumi, all these different mystics would come, and I learned so much about their teachings. What? How do you define a mystic? I still can't comprehend why they. I felt like people talk about downloads, but for me, I was just getting so much information. It was hard to grasp it all at times.
Um, I think that a mystic is someone who helps show the way. I don't, and we're over with the age of gurus. We're totally
Yeah.
over the age of gurus. And it's incumbent upon us to love a teacher and to be able to discern, oh, that piece doesn't work for me. I can't follow through. And even if you agree 100% with what a mystic shares, you still put your own spin on it. You still have your own expression of it. So, I like being a mystic. And I even did a recent Instagram post where I said, I'm not a guru. Well, people used to think of me as a guru, but I'm telling you right now, I am not a guru. And stop listening to spiritual teachers and turn on your own wisdom channel. And that's what my job is. So I'm a way shower. I'm willing to teach you how to connect yourself. Isn't there is it an Asian proverb where you teach a man to fish or you give a man a fish? And what happens when you do those two things?
Hmm. It's funny you say that because I would sit in Lake Shrine, and Yogananda told me this. I felt this. I felt his presence very strong at one time, and he says they're focusing on my self realization when I try to teach them to focus on their own. He showed me how they were worshiping him for the
Right,
self realization fellowship.
right. That's awesome. And how did you know it was Yogananda?
Because he kept popping up. Like one time, like everywhere I would go, I would hear about Yogananda. I even heard a voice one time tell me they don't know what they're preaching when I went to a regular church when I had like, I was new to all this stuff. And then one time I went to a Unity church because I heard about Unity Church and it felt more open. And then to get the guest minister, he started talking about Yogananda. I was like, everywhere I was going, I was hearing Yogananda, and I realized it was Yogananda. One time I sat in
Very
self realization, and the lineup of self realization,
Uh-huh.
his picture was glowing. It was like more alive, and everything else was just regular pictures. And I just had this inner knowing, yeah, that he's showing
That's
me.
fabulous. That's fabulous. Big, big gift. Big, big
Yeah,
gift. That tells you that even though you may think you've come from humble beginnings, that you have a lot of power and a lot to give, a lot to give. And that's probably
thank
why
you.
you're being told that give up the carpentry and move into your gifts.
Yeah, thank you. I want to ask you a couple more questions if it's okay.
Sure.
One was I love whales and I love dolphins.
Oh
What's your?
yeah.
I'd love for you to share your experiences with whales and dolphins and how powerful they really are.
Yes. Well, I have I've taken groups swimming with the dolphins more than 15 times,
Wow.
once a year for many, many years. And I have been with the whales swimming about 4 times. And I do have a whale swim coming up next August, and it will be in the Tahiti
Wow.
Islands. So if somebody's interested, I'd love to have you reach out to us and let us know. So that's on the books. And what I know is that the different kinds of dolphins and whales each have their own matrix. And the whales, the baleen whales, or uh, actually are record keepers on the planet, and they're holding the morphogenic field to keep it stable. Um, it's kind of like they're showing me a table that's got a glass of water on it and a toddler who's reaching up and kind of pulling on the placemat or the tablecloth, and they're just kind of tugging on it, trying to stand up, not realizing they're going to pull the glass off if they're not careful. And so the whales offer that stability for us. And for that reason, I believe that they're more evolved than we are. They hold a higher level of consciousness, and that they chose to be in in those bodies for that very purpose. And what a great act of service. So I have
Wow.
great love for them. Great love. Yeah. And it's amazing when you get in the water. Absolutely amazing when you get in the water with them. I won't deny the fact that the very first time that I was swimming next to a whale, they're so big that for a split second I was freaked out, you know? But then I thought, no, man, this is too cool. I talked myself down, but um, it is an incredible opportunity to swim with whales. And I believe that that's contributed to my abilities to open up to spirit and to bring forward powerful information for humanity.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. There's only 2 places in the world that it's legal to actually be in the water with them. And that is Tonga, as you know, and in the Tahiti area. And
Wow.
in the Tahiti area, it's very heavily regulated. You have to have a safety swimmer, and they require that you maintain a certain distance, like that.
Wow. I know you teach in China. Um, you teach students from China, right?
Yeah. I was teaching in China for 7 years.
Wow.
And I would go there for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. And, so I was in China a lot. Yeah. So that cycle is kind of closed down for a little while because of government stuff. So I'm hoping to go back, but I don't have any agenda to go back.
Mm. You mentioned dragons in your book, Waking Up in 5D, and you said, I know they weren't just mythological creatures, right? Because we find these dragons, these feathered serpents, and from Mesoamerica to India to China, all over the place, even Hawaii. What's with the dragons?
Well, the dragons are back. So we want to start out with, well, when did they go away? And the answer is twofold. The Catholic Church tried to demonize the dragons, and they talk about St. George, who supposedly slayed a dragon, but that's not true. It was a serpent. It was an evil serpent. If you go back far enough in the lore, you will find that. Dragons are all about clarity, and they help us with simple things like traffic and driving, and they help us to understand information that's coming in that we don't understand. They help us to get clarity on, what would I call it? The things that, let's say you get a piece of information about something and you think to yourself, that can't be true, but I think it's true. No, I don't want it to be true. But then if you call on the dragons, you ask them to help give you clarity. They will give you clarity on this. So the dragons are very powerful beings. And what has happened is they were physical in this reality at one time. And then they were escorted out for their own safety, not because they did anything bad. And they came back into the reality around 2012. And they started appearing to people, and they show up in cloud formations. And their presence is to help humanity stop being lied to. So you can call on the dragons and say, okay, I'm asking the dragons to show me the truth, to help me understand what's really happened, and to give me clarity. And then watch what happens, because you might not get an immediate answer, but you will get an answer. And there's a little meditation in the app that I have. I have a Android and iTunes app called Illuminate, and
Hmm.
it's got 40 or more guided meditations on it. And so I had a friend who was a chiropractor, a brown skin, and he was in my apartment in New York, and he was kind of telling me his troubles. He would fallen on bad times. And he said, all these sad things about himself. And I said, well, call in your dragons and ask them to give you some direction and to help you figure out what to do next. And I said, I'm going to step away for a few minutes and I'll come back. And he came back and he was crying. And he said, I saw my dragon. I said, well, don't tell me their name. I'm not supposed to know their name. It's only between you and the dragon. But he said the dragon was white
Hmm.
and shimmery. And I thought it was so poetic that he would have a white dragon. So it's very cool.
That's awesome.
Hmm.
At the end of your book, you talk about encouraging messages of light, and you talk about goddess of liberty. Who is the goddess of liberty?
Hmm. Well, I believe that the statue of the goddess of liberty was inspired, and that it was inspired by this amazing cosmic being called the goddess of liberty, who is a spokesperson for the great karmic board and represents justice and fairness. So when we're encountering something that doesn't feel fair, we can invoke the goddess of liberty. And she helps bring balance to the reality. She also helps with government and issues around freedom. And, we often think of freedom one way, but freedom is like Nelson Mandela. No one could control his mind the whole
Hmm.
time he was in prison. And there's a wonderful phrase in the movie about him where the man who was asked to be the coach of the South African team, and he's staring out the window, and his wife said, "What are you thinking about?" And he says, "I'm wondering what it's like to have been persecuted and in prison for 20 years, whatever it was, and come out and still love your enemies." Pretty powerful.
Thank you. Are they telling you anything about what's going on in today's world? Are we shifting to 5D, or
Yeah.
are we in the muddy waters still in order to shift? Like no mud, no lotus, right?
It's funny. Um, I believe that the cycle that we're in, which is in September of 2025, is a time of great transformation. I have often told people that there are three Earths, and there's a crash and burn Earth, then there's the do-over Earth, and then there's the ascending Earth. I'm not going to bother describing the crash and burn Earth. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. But the do-over Earth is well-meaning people who refuse to accept that humans on Earth are the only conscious species, and they refuse to accept that they are powerful beyond measure. And they're stuck in their rigidness or in their dogma, as you mentioned. And they use that as an excuse so they don't need to make a decision. You know, it's a little bit like if you're working with someone and they say, okay, I'm hiring you to do X. You're allowed to do this, you're allowed to do this, and you're allowed to do this. I want you to be creative, but don't do this. Then you have a boundary, you have a limit. And so when we step into a place where we know we're pushing the limits, it's very powerful to take a half a step back and to ask, is it in my highest and best good to pursue this line of thinking, of action? And then let spirit work through you. Mhm.
I appreciate
And
it.
that, so the do-overs, you know, they're kind of stuck because their version of the reality is, and I'm going to be very simplistic here and say, if I do everything you tell me, I am guaranteed that I'm going to heaven. And I know what heaven is because you told me. So there's this whole cycle, okay? And the ascending earth, what are they doing? They're interacting with all of us. And the idea is after it's going to be 40 years total that requires us to interact in a way that hopefully creates a level of comprehension and expression that is exactly what's in your 12-step program. That all religions carry important messages. All religions ask you to be contemplative and so on. And that no one religion is superior to another. And that's going to take some time for people to level up to that. So we're halfway through. And I think that within the next 20 years, we will see that in action on our planet. And the cool thing is, some of us won't remember the bad stuff.
Wow.
Mhm.
Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. How do we find you?
You can reach me at St. Germain Mystery School. You can write info at St. Germain Mystery School. And when you go to my website, it looks really simple. That's on purpose. And then when you start looking at the individual modules or the training or the chat or even the blog, you're going to find a wealth of information. So all of that's there. You can also find me on the blog, which is Illuminate, spelled with ILLUMINATE, Illuminate. And it's a purple box, a pretty purple, with a gold arrow. And it's a free app. So if you really like it, you will subscribe and have full access. But there's like 7 wonderful, some of them award-winning meditations to get yourself started with.
Thank you. Apologize. There were so many other questions I would have loved to ask you, but maybe I can have you on again in the future,
Sounds
especially with the
good.
macabre. So thank you. I really
Oh, yeah.
appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me. You asked some great questions. Thank you. It's been very wonderful to be with you.
Thank you, and namastizzle.
Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a break. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on a day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding for the neighborhood.